Hey friends out there in YouTube land, Rob here. Today I want to talk about camcorders. I'm coming to the defense of camcorders because camcorders suck. That's what everyone says when you make a video about camcorders. Now, I know the difference completely, but do you? And are you on the hate train for camcorders? Are mirrorless cameras better suited for you? Well, the answer is probably yes. For most people, and I suggest this, I get probably 100 different emails every month, people asking me which camcorder they should get or if they should get a camcorder, and I tell them all the same thing. You probably don't need a camcorder. If you don't know that you need a camcorder, get a mirrorless cam. Any type of mirrorless camera that you get, you'll be much more happy with because it will do two things very well: photo and video. In fact, the difference between camcorders and cameras is really so small, it comes down to use case scenarios, very specific mission type tasks. So if you need an all-arounder, then a mirrorless camera is going to do you much better. But there are times where a camcorder is specifically the tool for the job because of what it comes all packed together. Now, there are different types of camcorders, just like there are different types of mirrorless cameras. Some camcorders that are worth buying and some mirrorless cameras that are not worth buying. Let's get into that right now. First of all, in defense of camcorders, people usually talk about camcorders in relation to the crap camcorders they see at Best Buy or Walmart for the sub $300, $400 price point. Those little tiny point and shoot plastic things, they're all over Amazon. You can find them online for 50, 60, 80, 100 bucks. Those are not camcorders that are worth anything even spending your money on. Even the name brand ones like the Panasonics and the Sonys, those and some Canons, I think there's still some little Canons and some of those Vixios that you can see in the big box stores. Don't even waste your time on those. Very small sensors, long zooms, electronic image stabilization, 16 times that digital zoom is like 1600 times. It's not anything native to what the actual medium is capable of. In order to get a camcorder that's worth its weight in use case scenario, that's worth the price that you pay, you really need to look for things that are being used in news and documentary production. That means an ENG style camcorder. These are going to be much more expensive than the regular consumer grade crap camcorders that you would be buying otherwise. ENG stands for electronic news gathering, and if you haven't figured it out, the type of people that camcorder is geared to are productions that need things to be done in a documentary on location style, such as news. That's where something like the Panasonic series comes in. Even though there are many different types of camcorders in the ENG segment market, some of them not called ENG camcorders, there are some things to look for. The very first one is going to be high bitrate codecs. In those camcorders we talked about earlier that you might get from Best Buy, not the expensive ones from the Sony like the AX or the NX series, but the cheaper ones that you might get like the Vixios or the Handycams, those are going to have smaller bit rates, codecs, 60, 80, 78 megabits per second. Those are indicative of a consumer level product that often will have very limited types of use for upgrading your image in camera, such as image keystoning and all the different things you can do to make your image look nice. So they won't have as many manual type controls, and most of the time they're pretty much fully automatic or have some manual mode that won't work well. So that's the first thing you look for, bit rates. You're looking for a 4K bit rate of 150 megabits or higher as the standard in one of the high bit rate options. It is okay to choose a camcorder with 100 megabits per second 4K bit rate as long as you recognize that there are higher options out there. Sony has a great XAVC-S bitrate that is 100 megabits per second in 4K. That's perfectly fine. But if you could get the XAVC-L in any of its camcorders, that would be what you would look for more. But Sony segments the bitrate slightly differently. For example, Canon in their 705 or 605 series will give you their highest bit rates they give you in a camcorder, 456, 600 megabits per second. Yes, why Sony doesn't do that, I don't know. But Sony's XAVCS codec is different. Maybe it's better suited, maybe it's more consumer grade than a professional grade camcorder. I don't know, I don't necessarily own any Sony camcorders, although I do like the new NX800 quite a bit and may very well purchase one. The point that I'm saying is not that the codec necessarily matters, but an indication that you're looking at a lower spec, not good ENG type of camcorder for your use is low bitrate codecs. You need to see some high bitrate codecs in there, and you need to see some high bitrate codecs in at least 150 megabits per second. The next thing to know is that you won't always get a lot of the same features between lines, but you will get some that are standard. If you don't have the ability to at least put on an additional top handle for audio, then you're probably looking at a consumer level device. A consumer level device is not going to give you the type of audio that you need, and the standard should be 24-bit 48K audio or better. Sometimes a top handle, if you have one that is a hybrid unit or a built-in audio system that does 32-bit, is something that you'd really like to have. So if you find some camcorders that have those type of specs, you're already looking at higher specs. The last thing is going to be optical zoom over digital zoom. When you look at a camcorder and you see a high digital zoom, you're already recognizing that you're looking at something cheap you don't want to buy. Digital zoom sucks. Electronic image stabilization is only good when it's paired with optical image stabilization, in my humble opinion. When those two things work together, you have great optical zoom, plus excellent optical lens stabilization, as well as enhanced digital stabilization that does a crop or uses a sensor that has a slightly larger size so that the image can float around inside the sensor rather than a cropped image electronic stabilization. That's what you're looking for. So now that we've talked about the three things that help you decide if you're looking at a consumer level cheap camcorder or something you'd like to buy, let's actually get into what makes this better, what the case for camcorders. Okay, this camcorder right here has an equivalent. It's got a small sensor, but it's got an equivalent to a 600 millimeter zoom. So 24 or 25 to 600. So it's 24 times zoom lens that's built into this thing right here. And I absolutely love it. Look, so pretty. 25 times zoom. Now, that small sensor is going to get some of you up in a bunch, but I'll get to that in a second. 25 times zoom. Okay, that means for my use case, for your use case, you can be across the parking lot looking at the person catching a fish and see the scales on the fish. Okay, think about that for a second. Also, remember the size. Okay, so here we have a 20 to 60. This is a 3 times zoom. 3 times. Yes, it has a full frame sensor, but look at the difference. 3 times. So we've got our camera compared to camcorder. 3 times compared to 24 times. Okay. This is a 70 to 200. To be fair, 70 to 200 is about a 3 times, a 2.8 times zoom lens, 2.9. Yeah, I get it. But compared to 24, it's 8, right? So when you compare zoom lenses, it's a little bit different. We're comparing it to the widest it can go. This can go from 25 millimeters all the way out to 600 millimeters equivalent. This can go only out to 200. So that's an 8 times zoom in comparison. Again, 24 times, 8 times. And to get the 8 times zoom compatibility, recognizing we just said it's really a 2.8, 2.9 times zoom lens because it's 70 to 200. You use your, I'll say this now because if I don't, someone will just, so you didn't do it right. And for those guys, shut up. You use your widest angle of view and divide that into your most telephoto angle of view to get your total number of zooms for any particular zoom lens. For our purposes, 70 divided by 200 is almost 3 times. So it's 2.9. 7 times 3 would be 21. So if this was a 210 millimeter zoom, then you would have a 3 times zoom exactly. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, I'm not talking about this. I'm saying its widest field of view is only 70. It can't do 25, but if it could, 25 to 200 would only be 8, right? And we have 25 to 600, which is 24. Goodness gracious. Do you see the size difference that we're getting into? Yes, it's got a bigger sensor. Does that mean that it's better? In this case, no. If zoom is something that you needed in order to get a multitude of types of shots out of one camera and lens system, you can't get it. And as we're talking about it, once you do get into the larger zooms, you don't have the wide angle. So even if you got a 600 times zoom lens to put on here, the f8 or the f5.6 or whichever one Sigma's making, you're not going to have it zoom from 24. You're going to need at least 2 separate types of lenses in order to get your full focal length that you want to cover, and more gear. And how much more will it cost? This is a $2,000 lens on a $3,000 camera, $5,000. This is $2,000 altogether. My point that I'm making is, for those that say X, Y, and Z about why camcorders are no good, maybe they're no good for you. Remember, I said at the beginning, you only need a camcorder if you know you need a camcorder. And if what I have discussed hasn't already shown you that you need a camcorder, then maybe this next part will. The reason it's able to do that is because sensor size. This sensor size is smaller in this particular camcorder. This is a 1/2.5. It is paltry. It is tiny. It is smaller than the sensor in this. This is a 1/1.7. This is a Pocket Go 2. And it's also smaller than my 360 Alpha. This is the Ricoh Theta Z1. This has 2 1-inch sensors to get 360-degree video. Excellent camera. Cam something, right? 360 camera, but smaller sensor. This is about half the size as this one, even a little bit smaller than half. So you got to ask yourself, why even use a camcorder with a small sensor? Isn't it absolutely terrible? No. We just saw that the zoom range was one reason to use it. But the next reason to use it is specifically for that zoom range. Everything on a smaller sensor will be more likely to be in focus. So if you need to show things that are in focus more than out of focus, something that a large background or large sensor will do, it'll help you with getting a smooth cinematic. What does that even mean? Blurry background. If that's what you need, great. But if you're trying to show action on a football field, having a 600 millimeter zoom that's gigantic won't do you as much good as having a camcorder like this with a 600 millimeter equivalent zoom built right into it. And at that 600 millimeters, everything will likely be in focus because just the nature of the design. The parfocal length, well, not the parfocal, but the focal length as far as it goes, the depth of field gets longer the further you zoom, as well as the further you focus. Now, does that mean that you can't get any background blur? That's the other thing people say, that say cameras are so much better than camcorders. Why even get a camera? You can't get any background blur on this. That's crap. You can get loads of it. Do you know there's more ways? Obviously, you know you're watching this, eating popcorn, hopefully, because you want to have your points validated for why you feel good, because your buddy made you feel bad because he thinks he knows something and you didn't really know what you were thinking about at the time, which made you think like, is a camcorder really worth it? Yes, of course you can get background blur. All you have to do, there's 2 ways to get it. You can step back and zoom in and focus close. That will get you tons of background blur, even on a small sensor camera, or you can get background blur much more easily by just having a larger sensor. But when you have a larger sensor, you also have a shallower depth of field. I often shoot portraits with this camera. This is a 70 to 200 f2.8, right? If I'm shooting a portrait of an individual person, do you know what I usually use? f4, aperture f4. I get tons of bokeh, tons of background blur, but I use an f4. Why? Because I need a portrait to have their eye in focus and their ear in focus at the same time. Those of you that are portrait photographers that think you're so great that you don't need a camcorder because you know everything, but look at your portraits that you do. If you have portraits where the eye is in focus, but the ear and the face is out of focus, what are you doing? When you look at a portrait of a person, it should be in focus from nose to the back of the head. Everything else should be blurred. That's fine. But what about a group of photos? Are you the type of person that says camcorders are no good and you think you're so smart, but you can't even get a group shot in focus from the first row to the back row? Again, because of aperture. That larger sensor here isn't helping you. It's hindering you. It's making it more difficult to get everything in focus. That's something that on a camcorder happens pretty naturally. Now, let's move on to something else. Low light. A big sensor helps with low light without a question. I am completely in agreement with that. If you need a low light camera, a small sensor camcorder is not for you. However, have you seen my video that I did of this camcorder at the Virginia Beach fishing pier at nighttime? It's a 17-minute video where I talk about all my settings, but the actual video, if you want to watch, is only 3 or 4 minutes. And it goes from before sunset, twilight, all the way through after evening nautical twilight, EENT, early evening nautical twilight down to after evening nautical twilight, where the sun has set below the horizon, all the orange has gone out of the sky, and it's just black, blue, or purple. Wow, well, when you think about that, if this camera is no good in low light because of a small sensor, why does that video look so good? And I edited it on a doggone iPad, right? I even showed that's that 17-minute video. I show how to get that. Now, what does that require? Your noggin. It does require some experience. Getting that kind of excellent imagery, that beautiful look, without having any noise that creeps into the frame and stuff like that does take more work on a smaller sensor camera. But to say that only a large sensor camera can do it is just not true. To be fair, I don't often use this for indoor low light settings, and when I do, I never zoom it because at the 25mm focal length, I've got an aperture of f1.8, and that's a pretty wide aperture even for a small sensor camera. That lets in a lot more light. When you begin to zoom with this camera, it creeps down to f4. And f4 sounds okay on the full frame, but on a 1/2.5-inch camera with almost a 7x, 6.5x crop factor, f4 becomes a lot darker than you want it to become. So I don't use that, which means, what did I say? Use your noggin. If you're gonna use this camera indoors in low light, use it as your secondary camera, your wide angle camera. This is also the same reason that your iPhone takes better pictures with its standard or even wide angle camera, if it's one of the newer ones with the wider aperture, than it does with your telephoto camera at nighttime. In the bright day, none of this matters, because in the bright daylight or even marginal light, there's enough light for both cameras to do a great job. However, if you're going to go outside, let's say you're a movie producer or you're trying to make, well, if you're a movie producer, you probably will use different films, but let's say you wanted to use this camera, a 1/2.5-inch camera, to make a film, a video, in order something. Maybe you're just getting started out. Who knows? Let's say you wanted some constraints to work behind, but also with the advantages of just a small single one-camera system. How could you use this? Well, it's the way I did it in that video, and the one I do with my Norfolk at Night videos, where I use this camera as well as the one I'm recording on. On those, I simply use still light. If I'm outside trying to get a backlit or silhouette shot, this achieves it much better than this one. And it does it with a wider aperture, which also, what did we just say? A wide aperture helps with background blur, and getting close without zooming in this instance with a wide aperture, but focusing close, will help me have a blurry background at a wide angle lens with the subject closer. And if I'm doing silhouette work, like maybe a close-up shot of two people talking in a park or something like that, that's going to be great without having to stop down than it will here. I have to put my ISO at 200 and then stop down to 4 or 5 in order to get this backlit silhouette look that I want. No. At that point in time, there's too much depth of field. I need less depth of field. So I use something like this and that technique. My point is knowledge. Look for the situations that work towards the strength of your camera. Now, the final thing I want to talk about when it comes to image quality before I get into audio is going to be noise reduction. On a small sensor camera, something like this particular series does not have a high sensitivity function like my AGCX350. The high sensitivity function is very similar. Panasonic never said it, but it acts very similar to dual gain ISO. And I have it on the Panasonic AGCX350. It is not here. On the Panasonic AGCX350, it's very simple. Just flip on the high gain. It basically boosts by 2 times your ISO, and so you can use a lower ISO. If you would need to use 12 decibels of gain in normal mode, you can switch over to high sensitivity mode, and I might only need to use 6 or 5 or 4. On this camera, there is none of that. There's a super gain function. Here's the deal. If you're going to use anything on this camcorder above 7 decibels in regular light, or I guess at any point in time, in regular light, outdoors, noise will begin to creep in between 7 and 12 decibels, with 12 decibels being what I consider to be the max that I would put up with. In low light, I don't mind going up to between 7 and 12, but if you really need to get the shot and you punch it over 12 decibels and you're going up to 18 decibels, then you need to make sure that you have all of the noise reduction turned off in camera, because you're going to want to do that post-production. And there you go. Now we've talked about the noise, and we know that we've got a secondary workflow. It is true. If you wanted to use a full-frame camera, you wouldn't have to deal with that. But if you're trying to shoot in 18 decibels with this camera in the dark, I would likely say that maybe you should rethink that shot in the first place, because instead of spending the time to boost the noise or reduce the noise in post-production, I would think about my shot differently in a way to use environmental and spill light in order to get the shot while staying around that 7 decibel mark. In any event, let's move on to my final talking point today, which is going to be audio. Where is this mic going to plug in? I know, I saved this to the last. Some of you will say that it's not fair, but the reality is it's not going to plug in anywhere because there are no plugs. Yes, you can get an adapter. I'm completely aware. My point is that if you're trying to shoot wirelessly on location and you need to hide a microphone and get the good audio, even if it's just scratch and you're going to do a dialogue replacement later, wouldn't it be nice to just plug in the standard XLR here? Yeah, there's no doubt your camcorders are going to give that to you. Once you do that, you're generally going to get a pretty robust audio panel. On my AGC X350, I get 4 channels of audio. On this particular model, the X2000, I get 2 channels of audio. However, I get 2 channels to plug right in that can be run wirelessly. It is true, and you know that I use the Hollyland Lark Max, right? The Lark Max is great. Okay, I've got it right here. You know, it's the wireless one. You just stick it on, right? Put a lavalier, plug it in. But this also does connect straight into the 1/8" jack on your camera, which I got no problem with that. But when it comes to switching out different microphones, when it comes to audio options, you're just going to have more when you're using XLR as a standard. And I do recognize that 1/8" is becoming, or the mini jack is becoming the standard. But currently, it's not necessarily the standard. This right here, this XLR has been around for what, 70 years? It's going strong because it works well and it's extremely robust. And I got all kinds of mics down here that just will plug right into it. So even if you weren't working wirelessly, but you needed to add a guest to a show, you could just as simple plug the cable in and hand them the microphone and you've got audio, good audio, synced right away. I think that there is a huge case to be had, and we haven't even scratched the surface of the different options that we have. Some honorable mentions we didn't talk about. What about built-in neutral density filters? What about intelligent autofocus that just like never misses? Although I get it, this may not be as big of a deal now. What about all-day battery life? With the battery that I put in this, I can get 4.5 to 6 hours easy. Although I usually only shoot for about 4 hours, it's just on. And if I've got 2 cards in, which I always do, it's recording. What about that? What about dual card slot recording function built into this camcorder right here? Record all day long, not miss a beat. What about HDMI out? Or in most models, you're going to get an SDI out if you need it to go to a video truck or something like that, or any kind of switcher. HDMI will work as well too. There are just so many things about this type of form factor and design, and we didn't even talk about just how comfortable it is to hold like this. I've been basically holding it this way the whole time. This is a shot that you would get, boom, and it's in a comfortable, hold it for minutes, 10, 20, 30 minutes at a time, not have a problem with it. Are you going to hold your camera like that for the time? And the weight. There is a big difference in weight between these two. Although I've never had a problem with overheating, you got built-in silent fans that constantly cool the sensor on this that just let you keep on going. Also, although it's more standard today, what about your waveform monitors and your zebras and everything that are built into here? It's just something that has always been a part of a professional tool that is now just making its way in. So if you were to ask me, do I need a camcorder? My answer would be no, you probably don't. You probably just need a camera. But if when I've been talking, you've said to yourself, I need a camcorder, then guess what? You need a camcorder. And to be fair, if you are going to buy a camcorder, Panasonic just came out with their brand new X1600, X2100, AGC X20, and the new X1200. Skip the X1200 because you lose codecs, you lose the ability to get good audio, and you lose the viewfinder, which you will want when you need it and you don't have it, you will want it. And get at least the X1600 with the top handle. If you don't need the SDI, don't buy the 2100, buy the 1600 and the top handle and save yourself $300 over the upcoming 2100. However, if you had another $1,000 to spend and you were going to put it in an all-in-one system, I would suggest getting something that has a 1-inch sensor, whether it be Canon, Panasonic, my favorite, or JVC with the GY 500 series, Sony's got a brand new NX800 that's coming out. It's going to be $3,500 to $3,800, somewhere in there, maybe a little higher. I'm considering purchasing that one because I just love the features built into it. However, your budget's on you. So for around $2,000, you can have something like this. For around $3,000, you can have something in the 1-inch sensor type. And if you could find a deal somewhere in the used market, don't go more than 2 generations old from the current camera tech, which means nothing older than 2017. All right, guys, I'm Rob. I hope that you found this helpful. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. Use my links down below, and I will catch you all on the flip side. Bye for now.